Good afternoon, and thank you for joining DBA and Edge this afternoon for an important webinar to help us all understand COVID-19's impact on consumer behavior. My name is Nicole Barlis, Director of Member Relations with the Dairy Business Association and Edge Dairy Farmer Cooperative. As most of you know, DBA and Edge have been working tirelessly during the coronavirus pandemic that we're faced with to help all of our members understand the various resources that we have, the impact that this virus is having on our industry, as well as many others. And most importantly, our two organizations are here to really help our members by answering questions and trying to do what we can with governmental agencies to support all of our farmers and dairy businesses during this difficult time. Today's webinar, we're excited to host for you. DBA and Edge have done a lot to bridge relationships with various partners in the state, and we are proud to work with the Dairy Farmers of Wisconsin, and DFW brings a tremendous amount of resources to the table. With us today, we have Jen Walsh, the Vice President of Insights and Strategy for the Dairy Farmers of Wisconsin, to dig into her data and research to help us all, like I said, understand the impact on consumer behavior and what that means for dairy product purchases in our stores. That's been a question that those of us working in the association, I think many of us in dairy right now, continue to get faced with. Why don't we see milk in the store? Why are products being limited? Lots of questions around this issue. So today we're excited to welcome Jen to our webinar, and with that, I will turn it over to Jen. But one other thing that I'll mention before I turn it over to Jen is if you have questions during the webinar today, we will be answering those at the end. So please feel free to type in your questions. We will not be opening questions up for any type of voice questions. So type your questions in as you have them, and we will moderate and field those at the end of the webinar. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to Jen.
Great, thank you, Nicole. I'm so happy to be here. So just a little bit about myself. I am Jen Walsh, Vice President of Insight and Strategy at Dairy Farmers of Wisconsin, which what that means is I spend a lot of my time looking at data. In the best of times, I am knee-deep in data. During these times, it is even more data than you can imagine. Like, it's just a constant deluge of new numbers that we're seeing all the time. And so my team and I spend all day looking at numbers and trying to make sense of what they really mean and what we need to do as a result of what we're seeing in the data. So I'm happy to share with you a little bit about what we are seeing, both in terms of retail here in Wisconsin, and then a little bit more broadly for food service, to give you some idea of what the real data show. I know we all have ideas from what we're seeing in our own communities, but we'll look at what the data actually show us. So first, a quick look of where we are here as a state. Oops, no. Hold on, let me see if I can make this move forward. It was just working. All right, Nicole, this is where.
Right. I'll jump in here and see how I can.
I am. It was just work. Oh, here we go. Did you do that, Nicole, or did I?
I didn't, so you must have. You must have done.
All right, we'll get the hang of this, guys. Don't worry. Maybe it's just a delay, but okay. So first, let's just take a quick look at where we are here as a state. So as of 2 p.m. yesterday, which is when the Wisconsin Department of Health Services releases their data, there were 3,721 cases of COVID-19 in Wisconsin. And that number, of course, changes all the time. It is most certainly out of date, even as I speak it, as they are about to release new numbers here in less than an hour. But based on the data released yesterday afternoon, that's where we were. And there it is, though it's true that half of those 3,700 cases are in Milwaukee County, which of course is the most populous county in the state. It's also true that all but 7 of Wisconsin's 72 counties have reported at least one case of COVID-19. Even the least populated counties of Florence, Menominee, and Iron all have cases. And though we're still seeing exponential growth in the number of cases reported, it does appear as though the spread may be slowing, with cases now doubling every 12 days or so compared to earlier during the crisis when we saw the number of cases doubling every 3 or 4 days. So consumers have, of course, reacted to this pandemic in many ways, from working from home, social distancing, and of course, making changes to how they shop. So let's just look at what we've seen here in Wisconsin in terms of what changes consumers have made. Maybe. Sorry, guys. I don't know why I can't get my slides to advance here.
No, that's okay, Jen, and I'm trying to help on my end as well, and it's not.
Here we go. Okay, so this is looking at Wisconsin retail sales in grocery stores. So that we're looking at this first bar here is the week ending March 8th. So March 8th, it seems like really a lifetime ago, even though it was just in fact over a month ago, not a lifetime ago. We were, of course, already thinking about coronavirus at this point. It was in the news, but we were still, coming into the office. We were going to the movies. We were having dinner at restaurants. We were maybe even shaking hands with people, which, today just seems like the height of reckless behavior. But on March 8th, there was just one confirmed case of COVID-19 in Wisconsin, and that week, retail grocery sales were up nearly 5% compared to the same week in 2019, which I will say, in normal times would be considered really strong growth, right? If you didn't already know what was about to happen to this chart, you'd be really happy to see 5% growth. But then on March 12th, the public health emergency in Wisconsin was declared. And on the 13th, a statewide closure of schools was announced. So the coronavirus was certainly on people's minds before this, but things suddenly got pretty real for Wisconsinites, and we saw a huge surge in retail sales at the end of that week, with total sales up 45% and dairy department sales up 44% in Wisconsin. And that's compared to the same week in 2019. So then the following week, we saw gatherings of more than 10 people were banned, bars and restaurants closed. Wisconsin reported its first cases of community spread COVID-19, meaning it was not the result of travel to a known hotspot. By the end of this week, there were 382 cases of COVID-19 in Wisconsin. And that week, retail sales surged again even higher, with total retail sales up 55%, dairy sales up 65%. So truly just really mind-boggling numbers. But anyone who went grocery shopping that week can, probably verify those numbers for you. It was, if you were in a grocery store, you saw long lines to get in, long lines to check out. People's grocery carts were really filled to overflowing as they stocked up. And then the following week, the week ending March 29th, we saw a real slowdown of retail growth. Now, these numbers are still positive growth numbers, and in a normal year, we'd still be really happy to see these numbers. We would still be kind of astounded by this. So there's still positive growth numbers. It's just that the growth has slowed, right? So it's nothing like we saw those prior 2 weeks. Shoppers probably started tapping into the products they had already stockpiled, and maybe feeling a little bit assured or reassured that grocery stores weren't going to close like we may have initially feared. And then for the week ending April 5th, which is the last week I have sales data for right now, we saw sales growth stabilize at these lower rates. Now, to be clear, growth of 6% for total store and 20% for dairy, still really significant year-over-year growth. So the growth is not what it was initially. These numbers are, again, still really strong. I get these sales data every week. So on Sunday nights, I get the data for the week ending the previous week. So I look forward to Sunday night so I can see what the chart looks like. And I should know better than to make any sort of prediction on what the chart might look like with the next round of data, but if I had to guess, I would guess we'll see maybe similar numbers as we did this week, maybe a little bit lower now that people have settled into their new routines. But we should continue to see retail sales higher than year-ago levels as long as restaurants are closed, right? We know that about 20% of consumer eating occasions happen in restaurants. So with restaurants closed, consumers are substituting those meals they once ate out with meals that they're eating in home and buying the food for at retail. So we might expect sales to stabilize at these elevated levels, but I don't think we'll see a replay of that initial frenzy again. Not only do we have a stockpile of food to tap into, but we've also now seen stores start to limit the number of customers allowed in at one time. Walmart is doing this nationally, Trader Joe's is doing it. Even my local Pick and Save just down the street in Metcalfe's here in Madison, they're both limiting customers in. And then, of course, we've also seen a huge surge in unemployment, which will impact retail sales again, which will impact sales too. So now I will also say that if Wisconsin's safer at home order is extended beyond April 24th, we might expect to see another spike when any announcement is made. So looking at past data, it seems as though the stock-ups generally happened around the country during that same 2-week period, regardless of when the stay-at-home issues were ordered. The stay-at-home orders were issued, rather. So for example, even though Georgia didn't have a shelter-in-place order until April 3rd, Atlanta still saw the biggest spike in grocery sales during the week ending March 15th, much like the rest of the country did. So it seems that it's really a national news thing that drives the spikes rather than any local orders. But of course, if the safer at home order in Wisconsin is extended, we'll certainly be looking at how sales react and sharing that out as well. So this chart shows total dairy department, but then when we look at the products that go into the dairy number, we see that following those first 2 weeks of frenzied buying across all dairy categories, growth has slowed. And even for shelf-stable dairy milk and yogurt, we actually see that sales have reverted into negative year-over-year growth territory. But still really strong growth in a lot of categories, right? Butter is still up 54% over a year ago, processed cheese up 19%, natural cheese up 16%. So regardless of the specific product, the trend across the categories is consistent, right? With the week of ending March 15th, seeing huge growth, the following week, even stronger growth, and then really a substantial slowing down of the sales growth. And then when we look at how Wisconsin sales growth compares to the rest of the country, so first I apologize, I know there's a ton of numbers on this chart, and really I would encourage you just to ignore the numbers altogether and just focus on the colors that indicate whether Wisconsin sales growth is higher or lower than the national numbers. So if Wisconsin sales growth is higher, it's shaded in green. If it was lower than the national average, it's shaded in red. And looking at it this way, you see that year-to-date growth in nearly all of these dairy categories is lower in Wisconsin than it was in total US, with the exceptions being extended shelf life milk and yogurt, where sales growth is higher in Wisconsin, and then powdered milk and processed cheese, where we're more or less on par with the national numbers. So of course, the next logical question, if Wisconsin sales growth is lower than the national numbers, why? All right, why is Wisconsin sales growth lower? And I really wish I had a definite answer, but nothing is evident in the data. So I can tell you that it's not only true of the dairy department where Wisconsin sales growth is lower, but it's true of other categories as well. So we see the same trend in cold cereal, in frozen pizza. And in fact, even when we look at total store sales, which is this very first row here, total store sales, Wisconsin's growth rate was lower than the national rate as well. Maybe because the crisis started on the coasts and isn't felt as deeply here, you know, perhaps for entirely unrelated reasons, I'm not sure. But even though the rates themselves may differ and the absolute numbers differ, the general trend is the same in Wisconsin as it is in the total US, with big spikes initially and then a slowing down of growth. Another interesting thing we're seeing in the data, and this data is not from our IRI scanner data, but this is based on smartphone location data that allows us to track panelists where they are, where they're going to shop. And I will mention too, this is national data, not just Wisconsin. But we can see that dollar stores and supermarkets are actually gaining share. So this chart is plotting the change in year-over-year market share by channel. So of the visits consumers made to stores, what percent went to each type of store? So you can see that dollar stores in yellow and supermarkets in blue, pretty consistently gaining share in this post-COVID timeframe, meaning that shoppers were allocating more of their trips to these channels than they used to. So for dollar stores, not only is there the value component, which will become more and more important in a time of unemployment, right? The new unemployment numbers were released again this morning, another staggering number of initial claims reported. So value is certainly a bigger consideration. But there's also the factor of dollar stores being easy to get into and easy to get out of, right? Well, you're trying to limit your exposure to other people and trying to avoid contamination, right? If you go to a dollar store, you're not waiting in line to get in like you might have to if you're going to a club store. You're not shoulder to shoulder with other shoppers once you're inside. You can get in and you can get out, which is really important to shoppers right now. Club stores, so this would be stores like Costco and Sam's Club, represented by the green line here, show lots of fluctuation by day of the week. So they're losing share on weekends, and the weekends are indicated by the vertical gray shading here, but they're gaining share during the week. So as people's schedules shift with working from home and many people having reduced work hours, they're also shifting when they shop these club stores, again, likely trying to minimize their exposure by hitting the stores when they think fewer people will be there. Other research I've seen indicates that 2/3 of shoppers are trying to shop at slower times as a precaution, and I think that's really evidenced here. And not only are dollar stores growing in their share of foot traffic, as we just saw, but they're also growing in terms of dollars spent per visit. So more transactions at dollar stores, right? More people going, so they're increasing their share, so the actual number of transactions is up 25% year over year for the dollar stores. But then each transaction is also bigger, so spending more money during each transaction. So that's a lot of growth for that channel, given both more traffic and more spend per visit. Supermarkets, on the other hand, are seeing roughly the same number of transactions, right? People were already going to grocery stores, they're still going to grocery stores, but now the average check size is much, much bigger. So before you might have just stopped in for, a couple of things for dinner. Now you're going and you're getting things for 4 nights of dinner so that you don't have to come back and expose yourself again. And interestingly, the convenience stores here that you see on the bottom really not doing as well, either in terms of the number of transactions they're seeing or in terms of dollars per transaction. And when you think about how we're living our lives right now, this kind of makes sense, right? I mean, I don't know about you guys, but I'm not driving anywhere now, and most C-stores, convenience stores, are affiliated with gas stations. So I'm not driving anywhere. I have no need to go to a gas station, right? We're all kind of staying at home. A friend of mine actually recently said she's getting about 3 weeks to the gallon now, and I thought, yep, that sounds about right. 3 weeks to the gallon, I like it. So fewer trips to gas stations and convenience stores, of course, accounts for the lower year-over-year growth in number of transactions. But then when we finally do need gas, of course, gas prices are incredibly low right now. I saw somebody posted 97 cents a gallon in Appleton, and it's only $1.19 here by my house in Madison. So then even when we do fill up, the dollars per transaction is much lower than it was a year ago. Even if we are buying the same items inside, the total dollars per transaction is much lower. And then another big trend we're seeing, of course, is consumers moving to e-commerce platforms to get their groceries so they can stay out of the store altogether. Online food sales were up 183% in March 2020 compared to March 2019. 183%. A third of US households have now used an online grocery delivery service compared to just 13% in August, just about 8 months ago. So really incredible growth in the online landscape, and yet more growth is expected as more than a third of shoppers expect to purchase groceries online even more often in the future. And this is happening not just with shelf-stable grocery items like cereal and cans of soup. We're also seeing online cheese sales growing. So what this chart shows is the percent growth in dollar sales of cheese sold online versus the prior year. So the red line is brick and mortar, which just means your regular physical store, like a Walmart or a Kroger or a Jewel. If they have an online platform where you can order your groceries online and then either go pick them up in the curbside pickup or the click and collects, or have them delivered, that's counted here in the red line if it's through your traditional grocery store. The yellow line, so this is online only, which for all intents and purposes is Amazon. So there are some other online only retailers that don't have physical store locations, but Amazon is really the big one that we're talking about here. And one thing I want to point out is that so this chart starts in April of 2019. You still see double-digit growth, even back in 2019, in April of 2019. So online cheese sales were already experiencing double-digit growth even before the coronavirus pandemic. Now, to be fair, the base was pretty small to start, so it's really easy to experience 50% growth when you're just going from 2 to 3, for example. Much harder when you're going from 10,000 to 15,000, but still, we were still seeing really positive momentum in online cheese sales even a year ago, especially around the holidays, when you see this yellow line for online only retailers go up 108%. So that was the week ending Christmas 2019. But this last data point here on the right, so this is the 4-week period ending March 22nd, which for e-commerce data is the latest week I have data available for right now. But here you can certainly see the impact of COVID-19 on online cheese sales. So even though we were already seeing really strong sales growth, we see a huge spike here. So online cheese sales in brick and mortar stores that have online sales have more than doubled, and online sales from online only sites like Amazon up 69%. So consumers are certainly heeding the warnings about social distancing and limiting contact and looking for other ways to source their groceries, including perishable items like cheese. Now, whether shoppers will return to the physical grocery store once this pandemic is over, or whether they'll continue to use these online services now that they've gotten over that initial hurdle of trying it for the first time, remains to be seen. But I have seen some data from the NPD group that shows that once consumers try it, so once they try online grocery shopping, they kind of get hooked and they never really go back to their old ways of shopping, at least not entirely. So personally, I actually just tried online grocery shopping myself for the first time. And even though I had to wait a week to pick up my groceries, I will tell you I'm absolutely going to do it again. So I can't say for certain what will happen, but if this is in fact the start of a long-term trend where shoppers are swapping out their in-store physical store visits for online shopping, it really could radically change the retail landscape and how we think about merchandising, how we think about promotions, how we think about packaging, even how we think about what a store has to look like. So there's a lot of potential changes ahead. So I just told you about how retail sales are experiencing record growth, and yet yesterday, of course, the Commerce Department released data that showed that retail spending is down 8.7% over the month before, the largest drop in retail spending since they began tracking this data, I guess 30 some odd years ago. So how can this be true when I just told you that retail sales have skyrocketed in the past few weeks? Well, of course, total retail sales that the Commerce Department reports on includes much more than grocery. And though it is true that consumers are flocking into grocery stores, other sectors of the retail landscape are completely closed, including food service, which the Commerce Department counts as retail. We pull it out separately, but it is food service that is helping to drive down these numbers. So the food service part of the story is, as you know, a completely different tale than what we've seen at retail. So all restaurants in Wisconsin are now prohibited from offering on-premise dining. And with the exception of South Dakota, all states in the US have now banned on-premise dining. Many restaurants are, of course, trying to stay afloat by offering curbside pickup or delivery, but really that's a really tough transition to make. And even if you're successful in making that transition, it's just not going to be enough to offset those dine-in losses completely. The Wisconsin Restaurant Association estimates that half of all restaurants have closed entirely, at least temporarily. So what all of those restaurant closures mean is that the outlook for food service growth projections on a national level have fallen sharply, dropping deep within negative territory, much, much lower than even during the Great Recession, which you see in the pink bar immediately to the left here. Now, this chart is for total US, it's not Wisconsin specific, but I really have no reason to believe that Wisconsin data would not follow this national trend. So just like we saw that retail sales have kind of stabilized, it's in the food service sector, we're also seeing stabilization. But of course here, instead of seeing growth stabilize, we're seeing the decline stabilize with total restaurant traffic down 41%. So, about where it was the week prior. QSRs, or quick service restaurants, which is, essentially fast food restaurants, those restaurants are faring a little bit better than mid-scale or casual dining restaurants. Largely, a factor of quick service restaurants were already set up with drive-through capabilities, so they had some level of social distancing already being practiced before the coronavirus pandemic. Potentially a greater focus on value might be driving some of that too. And even possibly, now that we're with our kids all the time, kids like fast food. I don't know about your kids. The kids in my life could eat chicken nuggets every single day. So that might be another reason why the QSRs are doing a little bit better here. So despite this really bleak news for food service, there are some winners, with pizza and the QSRs, the quick service restaurants, gaining share. Now, when I say they're the winners, let me clarify that they are the winners of a losing game here. So this does not mean that their sales are up. It only means that their share is up. But of course, given that the size of the total pie has shrunk considerably, even though they're getting a greater percentage of restaurant traffic, they're still losing because total restaurant traffic is just down significantly. Pizza, of course, had already figured out the logistics of delivery and mobile ordering long before any of us had ever heard of coronavirus. And the QSR restaurants, as I mentioned, had already figured out the logistics of drive-through, so they were both ahead of the game. And even though fast casual restaurants, so these are restaurants like Chipotle or Panera, even though they tend to have a sizable carry-out piece of business, so you might think that they'd still be able to do okay and focus on that carry-out, they also typically do a lot of weekday lunch service. And of course, with all of us working from home now, we're not going out for lunch like we might if we were still working in the office, right? We're just walking into the kitchen and having a bowl of cereal. At least that's what I'm doing. But restaurants are still looking for other ways to drive traffic, and some, including Panera and Subway and California Pizza Kitchen, they've all started selling grocery items to try to appeal to consumers who want easier access to staple items during this, kind of uncertain time. And research from Data Central shows that consumers are eager to purchase groceries from restaurants, provided that the execution allows for mobile ordering and contactless pickup or delivery. And this includes dairy products. So you see here that 65% would specifically buy dairy from a restaurant instead of a grocery store. So I mentioned Panera as an example. Through Panera Grocery, and this is available locally for me here in Madison, through Panera Grocery, you can buy fresh produce and bread, and yes, even dairy from the Panera store. So if you just need a gallon of milk and some bananas, and you don't want to risk exposure at the grocery store, and you can't wait a week or two to get a delivery spot from your grocery store, you can order it from Panera and they just bring it out to your car to you, so you can really minimize your risk there. So this is, of course, all very, very new. Panera just launched this last week. We'll have to wait and see how these offerings impact traffic, both at the restaurants and then in turn impact traffic at grocery stores, right? If you're buying a gallon of milk at the restaurant, you're not also buying it from the grocery store. So we'll see how this all plays out, but it's really a great example of how businesses are innovating to deal with this new reality that we find ourselves in. So that is just a quick look at where we stand today. Of course, there's much that remains to be seen. It is, of course, very hard to plan for a future that is so uncertain. But I hope that providing, some actual data and the look at what trends we're seeing now, it might help with some of that future planning, as uncertain as it may be.